pleasantly surprised. I've read a bunch of Kobold Press adventures in the past. I haven't always been impressed by them. I've always enjoyed their monster design, but not as much their adventures. Hey, what's up, guys? I'm the referee, Connor McCloskey, and today we're going to be taking a look at the adventure Skeleton Key. This is a level 1 adventure by Kobold Press. It is for the Tales of the Valiant system, which is a 5e adjacent system, and it's written by Jeff C. Stevens. I'm actually super excited to be going over this adventure today. I did not realize originally that this was by Jeff. I was just immediately flipped to the adventure locations and was looking through it, and was really impressed by how well written the adventure locations were, by some of the layout choices in those adventure locations, and how smooth and easy they were to run. And I was like, wow, this is some really usable, almost OSR style influence going on in these room keys. This is really impressive. And flipped to the credits and saw Jeff's name there. So for anybody who has not played one of his adventures before, he also creates a lot of adventures for Shadow Dark. I've read several of those adventures as well, and I really enjoyed those. So I was very excited to find that out, and was impressed with the adventure before I ever realized that. The adventure is 17 pages. It covers 17 locations in the dungeon, and then there's also a sort of beginning town that kicks off the adventure pretty quickly. And there is an overland portion, but it's very linear, which is not a huge issue. It's level 1, they get you right to the dungeon door. You can make a little bit of a stop off here and there for some extra information or something like that, but really, the townsfolk know where the dungeon is, they tell you where the dungeon is, and you go there. The adventure basically begins when a grave hag, Auntie Tombstone, who you can see here, places a curse on the mayor's son, so the son is slowly withering away and dying. And the only way to stop the curse is to retrieve an artifact from a trap and puzzle dungeon known as the Coal Heart. So then, basically, the mayor and his cohort are just hiring anyone they can to go and try and retrieve this. And of course, Auntie Tombstone has some of her own plans as well. The adventure itself is pretty fantastic in my opinion. It has a classic level 1 feel, it's got some undead, things like that, but it's also very fresh feeling. It has a great slimy, sort of cold feeling to the dungeon as you explore it. There are a couple mini mechanics that are easy to use, the first being shadow tokens. So basically this is meant to be a horror introduction. So as your players lean into the horror, they get a meta currency that they can then spend different ways throughout the adventure, and it's implied through other adventures as well. And then the other one is a sort of ticking clock of the dungeon itself that is slowly wearing away at your characters and having them become more and more undead. And then, while it can reverse itself once they are able to get out of the dungeon, it is also possible that they could remain semi-stuck in that state. There's also a great adventure summary right in the beginning that gives you a layout of how the adventure is likely to sort of progress. It doesn't set any sort of requirements on how things need to play out or anything like that, but it's just very useful. The history itself as to what is happening in the adventure is brief, and there's also a very quick call to action once the players get to the town. You're also following another party who led the way prior to you arriving in the town, which is a lot of fun. You can find their mistakes along the way and also some potential allies. The villain herself is great, and there's some possible twists and turns here with how her plan might play out. The monsters are not completely unique to this adventure, but there's a good mix of some just sort of standard-ish undead and then some other creatures mixed in there as well. So while they're not unique to this adventure, there are enough non-standard monsters to keep things, again, feeling pretty fresh. The exploration, I think, is pretty effective. There are quite a few loops, especially for a smaller level 1 adventure. Again, it's not a very large dungeon, which you don't necessarily expect for a level 1 adventure anyway. And the exploration you do undertake is rewarded either with other paths through the dungeon or potentially additional hints that can help you through the puzzles in the dungeon or warn you of traps, things like that. The overland portion is pretty linear, but again, as I mentioned, it's a level 1 adventure. They're trying to get you right to the dungeon door. The townsfolk know where the dungeon is. It doesn't need to be a long drag-out process. This is explicitly a puzzle dungeon, so I know a lot of folks don't necessarily like puzzle dungeons, but in this case, I think they do a good job of backing it up with the lore, and I think it makes for a good level 1 adventure that has characters trying different things and not necessarily just using the stats on their sheet. On one hand, though, the wandering encounters could use a little work in my opinion. There are 4 of them for on the river and 4 of them for in the dungeon, and they're not all negative, which I know a lot of adventurers do that, but in my opinion, part of what a wandering encounter should do is apply pressure to the players so that they know while they're making decisions in the dungeon, they're never too far away from some sort of wandering encounter that could be a threat to them. And here we'll take a look at the map quick. You can see some different loops. There's different places where you go under the river, you go over the river. It reminds me of Cragmaw Hideout a little bit in a good way, and there's some different access points there. I think the information design in this adventure is pretty fantastic. It seems extremely easy to use and smooth to read through and would be very easy to run at the table. There's a nice common knowledge section early in the adventure, which is basically sort of a rumor table or hints that the players can go and discover, and there's a couple different avenues that they can go through to discover those throughout the adventure. So it's not just finding rumors in a tavern, but they're right there and easy for the referee to grab onto. Also, great use of impressions before the actual read aloud text of the room. So these impressions just give a sort of feeling of the room. You can share them with the players, or if they take some sort of action that would make it obvious to the players, then you can share it with them. The read aloud itself is brief and to the point and very useful. It gives the characters an idea of what's in the room, what they can interact with, but it doesn't take forever. There are some spots where the information stacking below the read aloud text could probably use a little work. It's little things like the information in those further sections not necessarily coming in the same order that it came in the read aloud text. Some adventurers go through and end up bolding those words, and then with bullet points and things like that. I think bullet points would be helpful to break this up a little bit, but really just sort of making sure that the information as it appears later for the referee to use comes sort of in the same order that it's in that read aloud text, I think would be fairly helpful. Also, as I mentioned early on, when I first flipped right into this, I thought it was very clear that there's some sort of old school influences going on here in a good way with the layout, and specifically those sort of impressions first, and then room descriptions, and then the information that the referee needs below that. Really reminded me of Rot Black Sludge, which is a Morkborg adventure that is well regarded for its room description design. And then in those location descriptions themselves, there's great writing throughout. It really brings characters to life, it brings the areas to life, and is just overall very evocative, but again, quick, it's brief, it's not very wordy. Information in general is just condensed, including the checks and the stat lines and the numbers you need to know. It's just very usable. So for a good example, let's take a look at Area 9, River Crossing. It's a pretty short room, pretty brief. There's not a ton going on here, but again, it's evocative and very useful. So first we have our impression, an underground river, echoing chamber. The tunnel opens to a chamber bisected by a 40-foot wide chasm with the river running below. Remnants of a stone bridge line both edges of the chasm. Then we have remnants, a trapped stone bridge once connected the sides of the chasm. At some point the bridge collapsed into the river below. Then the river. The distance from the chamber's floor to the river is 30 feet. The river below is roughly 20 feet deep and flows from the southeast at a rate of 15 feet per turn. A PC in the river is carried downstream to Area 12. And then crossing, the PCs must devise a way to cross the river. Below are a few ways they might accomplish this task. Using items found in Area 8 to construct a ladder or a walkway, teleportation magic or similar, or climbing gear. So the traps and puzzles themselves in this puzzle dungeon are fairly clear. They don't seem frustrating reading through them. There's not a lot of gotchas or anything like that. You can find other hints in the environment that, again, just sort of makes that exploration that much more important. And overall, I am very impressed with this adventure and pleasantly surprised. I've read a bunch of Kobold Press adventures in the past. I haven't always been impressed by them. I've always enjoyed their monster design, but not as much their adventures. But this adventure in particular, I think, does a fantastic job and is well worth the price of admission. So I'm going to give this 8 stars, which is I would definitely run this, and I'm very glad that it's part of my collection now. And with that, I've been your referee, Connor McCloskey, and that's today's game. Thanks, guys.